Welcome everyone for another Conversations with Kate. I'm glad to have you here today and I'm really thrilled to be joined by leaders in both the Malden Public Schools and the Melrose Public Schools to talk today about social emotional learning. From Malden, we are delighted to have with us Erin Craven, the Director of School Counseling, Testing, and Academic Support, and Charlie Conefrey, the Director of Athletics and Health and Physical Education. From the Melrose Public Schools, we're joined by Cari Berman, Assistant Superintendent for Pupil Personnel Services, and Lindsey Dobbins, Administrator for Counseling and Student Services, grades 6 through 12. Thank you all so much for taking some time out in a very busy year and season to be with me to talk about something I think families and residents across the district and the Commonwealth are really keen to learn more about in terms of the leadership at the school level of supporting our students' social and emotional well-being and learning during what has been a really challenging time. You may know that I'm a former 7th grade teacher myself, and then after law school, I worked in education law and policy, including for 5 years at the state level where I was on the Safe and Supportive Schools Commission. So thinking about ways in which we embrace and support the whole student as really important and foundational for ensuring academic success is really near and dear to my heart, and I know to yours. I think of social emotional learning as being such an integral part of the mission of education and preparing our students for a successful life's journey. It's the process through which young people and the educators who are supporting them apply skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, a way of which we learn how to feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And I'm really glad to know that Massachusetts as a state has worked to embed social emotional learning into many of the curriculum frameworks that guide how our classroom leaders are providing content to their students, including in our math content frameworks and our ELA frameworks. And that's just been so important, including as we've seen with some regularity concerning data about how our children are handling such a challenging time during COVID. So I'm glad to learn from you all today about the ongoing work and leadership that both districts have demonstrated in this space, with some particular attention on ways you've had to pivot and negotiate what's been a really challenging few years for our kids. So why don't I stop with the context setting and turn it over to the experts. I'm so glad, again, you're here. And I'd love to hear from all of you a little bit about what the districts are doing in this space of social emotional learning, maybe just some background for folks who are less aware of this in terms of how it's been integrated into the districts that you serve. And then we can also talk specifically about what it's been like to work on these issues during a global pandemic. So happy to turn it over to whoever wants to jump in.
I'm happy to start us off.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin. Go ahead.
When we talk about SEL, and we before, as you mentioned, sort of before the pandemic, we embedded a lot of it into standards, into instruction. We spent time in Malden Public Schools making sure that there were morning meetings and advisories in the K through 8 buildings, and social emotional learning lessons sort of sprinkled throughout K through 12. I think during the pandemic, it offered school systems an opportunity to pivot in terms of traditional structures of schedules. And that allowed a lot of opportunity for things like an SEL block, or what has become pretty popular is called a WIN block, a what I need block. And I think the opportunity to pivot with how we see a traditional school day functioning has allowed the space for more practical and structured social emotional learning on its own, as opposed to embedded in an English or math or history.
Okay.
I know behaviorally in Malden, we adopted sort of PBIS, positive behavioral intervention systems and supports, positive behavior interventions and supports. So many acronyms in education. And that was pre-pandemic as well. And behavior and attitudes, being so closely related. I know our schools have been successful in integrating that at all levels to sort of maintain environments that are welcoming and supportive of all the students. So I'll pause there for a moment. But
can you just tell me a little bit more about the what I need block for those of us who don't know much about that? What does that entail for a student? What are some examples?
Yeah, sure. And I can see heads nodding, so I'm sure Melrose has something similar. So again, when the pandemic began, it was sort of that, what is in school time, what is remote, what is on screen, what is off screen, trying to care for all those different needs of all the students, and different styles of learning and what was happening in different homes. And so the what I need block sort of came in both pre-pandemic and really became cemented during the pandemic around, it could be academic support, it could be time with a school social worker, it could be time with your school counselor, it could be time in a classroom where you maybe need some extra academic bolstering, it could be more of a club or an activity, knowing that different students all have different needs when it comes to what they need to be successful in a school setting. So I do think, I know many schools have adopted it even locally. So I'm not sure, I think it means a little something different to every school, but that's what's beautiful about it, is just like it's different for every kid, it's different at every school.
Sure.
And I'm sure Melrose can piggyback on what that is for them as well.
That's great. Yeah, Cari or Lindsey, do either of you want to talk a little bit about this, the same dynamic that's happening in this district?
Sure, I can go first.
Great. Thanks, Lindsey.
Yeah, no problem. So we started we got approval to join the S3 Academy through the Rennie Center and Boston College. So we've been doing the Systemic Student Supports Academy for this is our third year. So it was before pandemic, but we saw a real shift in like what our needs were because of that, which has been really interesting. And we've really been able to like expand what we thought we knew about what students needed for supports. And just like Malden, we call it a flex block, and it's very similar. So we really rely heavily on students identifying goals and help with their teacher to kind of like figure out what they need to get done for the week, and anything that they need to make up, redo, retake, whatever they need during that time period. They can go see guidance, they can go make appointments with whoever they need to. It's been really, I think it's been really great. Mm-hmm. Additionally, the high school and the middle school in Melrose has created a very specific block. We call it crew in the high school and team time in the middle school. And it's been a really great opportunity for us to have, like, again, like Malden, that SEL time. It's a very small, structured environment. We do different screeners, we'll do guest presentations. It's a varied mix of like what students might be interested in at the time and what we need to know as school leaders to kind of like figure out what the current needs are of our students as we continue through this very challenging time. Yeah, that brings up a lot of like emotional need that we didn't always see in this way. So again, like we've been really focused on that whole child experience and making sure we're wrapping around in every way that we can. Always, that's always been part of like our mission. I know you said this earlier about that educational like focus.
Right.
But I think again, the pandemic has highlighted a lot of what different kind of like needs that students have, and being able to provide that with the different structures that we've come up with at this point.
Sure. I see lots of heads nodding for both of your comments. And I'm wondering, can you speak with some specificity, any of you, about what are some needs of students that you hadn't really been as present or as visible pre-pandemic that's really that's something that you're seeing a lot of, in what is now the third school year in which there has been some component of COVID, and how have you been addressing that, or what are some plans you have for continuing to support your students? And by the way, I also recognize that, we're all dealing with social emotional challenges in learning, including adults. So if you also want to talk a little bit about, how educators are feeling supported and how you are feeling supported, what are some intentional practices that your districts may be integrating to support, the employees of the district?
I was just going to jump in just when you were talking about what's been different.
Yes.
I think that like connection piece, I think maybe before we kind of expected or assumed that students were kind of like experiencing that connectedness and that sense of belonging, whether that be at home or in their different activities and at school. But I think this really highlighted that like we need to be even more present with our like commitment to like bringing kids in, bringing staff in, and like making us like one community. We've in Melrose, we've been doing this, like we wear red on Fridays, and we've been doing that for years. During the pandemic, we were like taking pictures and posting it and stuff like that, just to kind of create that sense of community, that sense of belonging. I think we do a really good job, and like especially our high school principal, Jason Merrill, has been like fantastic. He's always been like this, and creating that community, but even more so during this time when I think there was a lot of disconnected behavior, and like that, what that created. Next week is National School Counseling Week, and the theme is Better Together. So we're at the middle school, my counselors and I have been working with the PTO on like little like fun things we can do for the staff about how we're counselors and teachers are better together. So we've been working with them, which has been really cool. Doing like coffee and donuts and stuff next week, and Post-its and like fun pens for the teachers. Just, like just little cute things to remind everyone that like we are in this together, and we all do need support during this, because we are very focused on the kiddos, which is fantastic, but we also need to help each other get through this. This has been difficult.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to just kind of jump in on when we're talking about the crew block, as much as we were talking about it being an SEL block and time to do, different things that you need to do within a school day, and, without disrupting an English class because we need to do, PSAT registration or something like that. We're able to embed that during our crew block. But one of the other purposes was to put, 12 or so students in front of one adult. And so to form that really, strong connection, we're asking that adult to check in on Aspen, on these students' grades, to kind of, they see each other first thing on Monday mornings, to set the tone for that week, to read, if a student didn't read the email from Mr. Merrill, to go through that, what's coming up for the week, that time management. So like embedding all those SEL competencies that you mentioned, Kate, at the beginning,
Yes.
But really teaching them explicitly in that setting, but also doing some fun things, watching videos, talking about current events, forming relationships, asking kids how their weekends were, how their games were, how their performance was. So those pieces are really important. I think, at the elementary level, students generally have, one teacher, so it's a little bit easier. And I think, one of your questions was about I should have written it down, but, you kind of asked about like the post-COVID piece.
Sure.
Certainly, I think our middle schoolers are being affected. Our eighth graders, which is where we're seeing a little uptick in behavior right now,
Yeah.
they have not had any type of normal school year. So we're making assumptions as, eighth grade teachers and teams and administrators about, things that kids should know. And so we're doing a lot of work on reteaching, and we too have a fairly robust tier 1 PBIS system across the district. So constantly reteaching and revisiting our behavioral expectations after vacations at the beginning of the week. And you really trying to use that language consistently for, why we're asking these pieces. So like at the high school, it's mindful, honorable, and supportive, right? So, that behavior you just did toward your neighbor there was not supportive, really calling it out and being explicit about the why.
Got it.
And then of course the adults trying to model this and trying to give grace to our adults, because there's just so much for educators to do today.
Yes.
And it's hard, and we have deadlines, and we have high expectations. I think, across both districts, from our students, our staff, our families, but trying to provide that grace. Melrose was exploring, can we bring in some type of counselor for some of our teachers? What does that look like? Is it insurance? Is it, we could do it first, but then does that person take insurance afterwards if someone makes a really great connection? During the pandemic, we had people hosting recipe talks on Monday nights for teachers, so people would come together and talk about that, or they would do community circles as adults. And that was really nice, facilitated district-wide with different themes, come with your silly hat on and come talk to us and just make those connections. But certainly, it's changed, and I've always been a whole child educator. So to see that pendulum swinging back, I'm certainly feeling pretty good about that.
That's great, Cari. Thanks for sharing those comments. And one thing that's different between the two districts that are, talking today is the way in which we divide up our schools. So hearing you talk about eighth graders, really, I hadn't really thought about them before. As a former 7th grade teacher, you're right. In our schools, if you're in 8th grade right now, you've never had a full year of pre-pandemic life in the middle school program, which is really incredible. And you may know that Malden divides up the schools differently. So it's a K-8 model followed so by high school. So perhaps, and that's one difference in which maybe there has been, you may have seen something of a different need set than from the Malden students. I don't know. But
yeah, I would say there is a difference there, definitely. And just to piggyback on on some of the behaviors that we've seen, getting back into some normalcy where we're actually in the classroom. Our kids spent too long in this virtual world, and I think honestly really forgot how to act. How either they're not getting the supports at home, and they spend so much time on screen in this virtual learning that they really missed out on all of these social interactions that they kind of would learn on the job, so to speak, and get support on a daily basis in person. And some of the, just basic coping skills, how to act and react in certain situations at all grade levels, how to deal with, mild stress and anxiety of academic stressors, of stress in physical activity and sports, and how to respond in a positive way. So those are some of the behaviors that at least we've seen on our end that we're trying to address in using supports on the outside, such as, using online platforms for support for students, teachers as well, especially once again, piggybacking on the adult piece. I think it's very easy for us to forget that, we as adults who support our kids in schools, we need help too sometimes. And who are the people that are going to oversee that? And, so we're spearheading a few things on our end, and we're lucky enough that we were able to get that grant. And Ms. Craven, I can't take any, she was the champion in writing that grant. So,
and you're referencing a state grant that Malden Public Schools just received from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, focused specifically on SEL, right?
Yeah, correct. Focusing on SEL and support. And so we're using some of those funds in different ways so we can support both students and teachers, educators, and staff as well.
Can I ask you, Charlie, a little bit also about the connection to the degree that you mentioned sports? And so, given your role there and your oversight of physical education, I'm wondering if there are also strategies and components of SEL that involve sort of physical movement and health that you've been able to incorporate in the district.
So what we've done K to 12, basically, obviously age appropriate lessons that are more skills based and teaching skills in the health classroom while simultaneously teaching about the body, the brain, substance use, abuse, and prevention. And once again, going back to those, how to act in certain situations, how to react, who to go to for help in this world that we live in, right? We've missed so much time. And we're approaching almost 2 years and still dealing with, in some way, shape, or form, dealing with the side effects of COVID. Right? We're still playing sports in masks, which stinks, especially indoors. You're running track, you're playing basketball. What kind of negative impacts does that have on athletes? And all of those things accompanied together, it's tough, right? So we've championed and literally really pushed over the last pre-pandemic and right up until this day to make sure that time on learning specific to physical activity and health education is a priority, where we have two health educators in each of our K to 8s. We have health educators and phys ed teachers at the high school, where it's not an afterthought. It's becoming more of as it should be, a priority, right? Because your mental health well-being, physical well-being is paramount to how you're going to perform in the classroom and at home, in your relationships with your friends, with your parents and so forth. So that's really where we were at. We took Erin and I did a inventory of where we were at last summer. What are people doing in each building to support social emotional learning, and it kind of ran the gamut. We were all doing something, but they were kind of operating in silos. So we were trying to figure out a way, how can we bring everyone together on the same page? And that's kind of where we're at now. And the grant money came at a perfect time, right? So we're finally getting back to normal. We're in classrooms and we can really roll this out so we can support students and staff and hopefully all be on the same page. So if it's a student, we kind of have a transient demographics. So students might within the city change from one school to the other, but they're getting the same language. They're getting the same instruction.
Right. Sort of like what Cari was saying about some of the language you can use in the moment to bring it back to those core values and competencies that you're hoping in an age appropriate way students are really embracing and owning.
Right.
That's great. So with our time left, I guess I'd ask two things. One would be sort of what gives you hope. What are some, ways in which you've just seen resilience and perhaps progress in this space? And with that in mind, also, what would you want policymakers like me or, my colleagues or folks at DESE or in state agencies to be thinking about to really support your work? Go ahead, Charlie. Yeah.
I would say just really quickly, and you could, I'm sure everyone would agree, bottom line, it comes down to resources, either financial or otherwise, whether it's buying materials, supports, curriculums, or having enough money to have staff, right?
Sure.
So we have enough guidance, we have enough adjustment counselors, so we have enough support staff to do all of this at every grade level for each one of our students. And sometimes that's not the case, right? Unfortunately, it comes down to finances sometimes. And we're grateful. Don't get me wrong. We are absolutely ecstatic that we're getting extra funds so we can do some of these things, but it's a starting point, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing today is going to increase what we're doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Sustainability piece.
Yeah, and it's not a one-off. It's not just say, check the box, we did this. We want to see progress. We want to see the student that goes through our school systems from kindergarten and then graduates Malden High School, Melrose at 12th grade to go on to college or tech school or whatever they do. They got the necessary supports that they needed through each one of our schools. And ultimately it comes down to money.
Well, right. And certainly it's the case that we're seeing, the deployment of some of the federal COVID relief funds, both at the at the state level, and then also with districts getting quite a bit. I'm glad that many districts are thinking intentionally about supporting students' social emotional well-being during this time. And I've heard about counselors and thinking also in terms of staff, that's so critical. Obviously the Student Opportunity Act funding is getting implemented and both districts here are going to get sizable increases in their state aid, which is really great for that sustainability piece. And as I can just commit to you as someone who's spent my whole career in education that it'll always be front of mind, but absolutely critical to make sure that we're thinking about the funding piece to support all of the important work. I'll take that to heart. Yes, Lindsey, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Erin, please. And then Lindsey.
I was going to say, I'll piggyback on Charlie and then I'll let Melrose have the last words.
Okay, perfect.
So I was just thinking about what you said and what has been, positive or good, or what have we gotten? And I think back to sort of the first thing you mentioned, school systems across the nation and the state and the area have been able to rethink, our proverbial in the box. What is education? It's traveling at this time to this place for this subject at this age. And we've been doing that for hundreds of years. So I think the pandemic offered, if it had to offer something positive, an unusual window into having the capacity to rethink the very basics of how we educate our kids, between what hours, in what ways, in structures, again, that have been around for hundreds of years. So an interesting way that we're still growing in that, right? As we,
Right.
we were talking about flex, Lindsey, and that's actually at the high school, we call it flex block now too this year. So it's like, it's a growing piece for all of us, but that's a positive, I think.
Yes.
And then if there was something else that I could mention beyond funding resources and people and everyone's plates too full and what do we do? I think if there's anyone in the legislature that doesn't understand the term of, compassion fatigue, and educators, not just counselors and social workers, but all educators, we go into these helping professions with open hearts and minds for our students, and that process of empathy is what makes the helper so vulnerable. And it's just, it profoundly affects our energy and our work every day. And compassion fatigue is a real thing. And given just the extreme level of trauma globally, that it has also sort of risen in how are we all working within that framework every day, all the time. But just the awareness of that is something that I would bring to the forefront.
Thank you. Thank you for raising that up. It's helpful and powerful to hear it. So appreciate that. Lindsey, go ahead.
I was thinking about that positive piece, and I know Cari mentioned it earlier, but that kind of like shift back to thinking about the whole child and like what's really at that base of like what they need, and it's that social emotional connection. And I think the pandemic brought our teaching staff back to that like kind of like basic point. But within that, I think some of them still get really nervous about not hitting the particular curriculum framework, the academic piece. If we're telling them to focus on like making sure that they're a trusted, supportive adult to these students, then they're not potentially getting to what they need to academically. It makes it a little bit more challenging, especially as, I'm sitting here and it looks like, or it sounds like, Erin, based on your title, that you're also kind of like looking into that MCAS piece, and that gets really stressful for students. And when we're saying that all we care about is like making sure that they're okay as children, as growing young adults, that we then are giving them these high stakes tests. It doesn't feel great. Not sure that there's anything that anyone can do about that at this point. And it's nice to be able to see where students are at and like where we need to go. But
Right.
I always think of that high school piece of that high stakes exam. It just doesn't feel great right now post pandemic. That was my kind of positive and challenge at this point. And then I know we're continuing in Melrose, at least, to talk about like, how do we move forward? How do we use our funds that we're getting through the state very purposely? I know we last year, I think, Cari, correct me if I'm wrong, we hired a METCO social worker who works with all of our students in the district, which has been really great. And we have potential for another counselor coming in. I think it was actually recently posted as an adjustment counselor at the middle school, which is again where we're seeing a lot of our behaviors are kind of like ramping up right now, in addition to our guidance staff who's already there. And we are potentially posting for a director of SEL to go district wide. So while I am kind of focused on that middle and high school spot, sometimes there's like a need again for that vertical alignment in that pre-K to post-grad world. And additionally, that person would really focus on helping staff kind of really understand how to integrate and embed a lot of this work within their classroom so that they're not feeling that real disconnect between like, okay, I'm going to do SEL, but I'm also going to do my, content area, and hopefully start to meld those pieces together a little bit more, especially at the secondary level, just to give them that confidence and empowerment to move forward with that.
Got it. Okay. Anything else that anyone would want to share at this juncture? I'm just really grateful for your time, and I know that people listening will learn a lot. And I'll certainly take to heart what you've shared with me in terms of the work that I'm doing, and including as the budget comes up, and is always working on that. So it's just really been a pleasure to talk with you all today. Erin and Charlie from Malden, Lindsey and Cari from Melrose. I'm glad to bring you all together for such a great conversations. And thank you everyone who's listening with Conversations with Kate. I hope you're well, and I look forward to continuing to work with everyone on this conversation in the future. So be well.